The first big domino of the NBA offseason is falling, and it is Bradley Beal trade rumors. We got tweets from both Woj and Shams at the exact same time, which means that they were fed this information that the Wizards are exploring trades for Bradley Beal and are going to work with him to find a trade destination should they decide to reset the roster. This is the single biggest piece of information that we've gotten in the years of Bradley Beal trade speculation, that they're finally ready to move on. They've always kind of tiptoed around it. They've been willing to give him more money. He's never been super unhappy. They continue to give him more control, but now we really need to seriously consider where his next team is going to be. There's 4 key teams that you need to keep in mind, and the reason why it's so clear which teams Bradley Beal could possibly go to is because, more importantly than anything else we're going to talk about in the rest of this video, he has full control over what team he goes to. If Washington decides to trade him and they come up with a deal that they like with a particular team, they have to bring it to Bradley Beal and say, this is what the deal looks like, and then he can say yes or he can say no. They gave him a $250 million contract last offseason and included in it a no trade clause. Bradley Beal gets veto power over any trade that involves him going to a new team, and that means it's very clear which places he would want to go to, as well as some of these tweets say, he gets the opportunity to say, after the trade and see what the trade looks like, this is still a roster that I would want to go to. Make sure that the team that he's going to isn't giving up too much in exchange for him. Those 4 teams include, in my opinion, what would be the front runner at the moment, the Miami Heat, because the trade package in terms of what would make sense for both teams as well as the situation that Beal would be going to is really, really clear here. This trade would involve some combination of Tyler Hero from Miami, some kind of draft compensation. Maybe you want to throw in Jovic in there as well, but it would look like that kind of structure. Hero with some other stuff in exchange for Bradley Beal. And Beal would get the opportunity to look at that situation and say, we've got Butler, we've got Bam, we've got myself. That's a place that I would want to go to. I want to be in Miami. I want to be a part of that organization, and I want to try and push and contend for a title. And I've already talked about this all season about Miami being a front runner for players like this because of their ability to trade Hero and some other stuff and really upgrade their roster and push for a title while JB is still at least kind of in his prime. Other teams to keep an eye on here include the New York Knicks, of course. And last offseason, we went through this exact same thing where it was rumored that they were going to get Donovan Mitchell, and the offers that were out there have been really heavily reported. They were willing to do RJ Barrett and some draft compensation, maybe one other young player in exchange for Donovan Mitchell. And I think the structure would be pretty similar here in a Beal trade, but maybe a little bit less. And that's kind of the wrinkle to all of this. Because of Beal's age, he's no longer like considered a young player. He's definitely a guy that's, in his prime, but aging out of his prime a little bit. And the massive contract and the no trade clause, his value is going to be lower than you think that it is. So New York could do RJ Barrett and a pick, RJ Barrett and 2 picks, which I think was kind of what they were willing to do for Mitchell last offseason. But it's not going to be RJ Barrett and a young player and 3 picks and some other compensation here. Same thing for Miami. They could do Hero and a first and say that's our offer, and that could pretty much be the extent of the Beal conversations. New York is always going to be a team to keep an eye on when it comes to bringing in stars. You bring in him alongside Brunson. You've got Julius Randle there as well. That's going to be a real possibility. And again, only if Beal is excited about going to that particular team. And another team that has to be brought up here, of course, is the Boston Celtics. I'm not sure that Beal would want to go to Boston, but there is a trade structure here, of course, that makes a ton of sense. You've got Jaylen Brown, you've got Bradley Beal, you switch those 2 guys. Washington has to deal with the new contract for Jaylen Brown, which I'm sure they would ultimately give him, and I think he's the best individual asset that we've discussed so far for Washington in exchange for Beal. And Boston solves their Jaylen Brown possible supermax problem. They've got Beal, they've got Tatum, someone in Beal that provides a little bit more of an explosive offensive game than someone like Jaylen Brown, maybe fits a little bit better alongside Jason Tatum. Both of those teams move forward. The problem with that deal, although it makes sense on paper, is again, the value in exchange for Beal, I think, is lower than it typically would be because of his age, because of the contract, and because of the no trade clause. And Jaylen Brown in exchange for Bradley Beal, a guy that they've held on to for years, despite having the opportunity to get Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Davis, Paul George, they've held on to Jaylen Brown for this long to then trade him in exchange for Bradley Beal. That doesn't feel right to me. That feels like way too much in exchange. And so Boston would be a clear candidate, but I'd be surprised if they were willing to trade Jaylen Brown in exchange for Bradley Beal. And then the last team that you always have to mention here, of course, is the LA Lakers. It's difficult to come up with a trade package here that one of these other teams could not beat, but the reason that the Lakers were here is because of that no trade clause. This is why it was so damaging. This is why I screamed and yelled about it all last offseason about how much of a disaster it was that they put the no trade clause in, because Beal could just veto everything else from any team and say, you know what, I'm only going to the Lakers. I only want to go to that team. And Washington is forced to only negotiate with that team and really not get that much in return. Maybe they get the 2029 first from the Lakers. Maybe you figure out a sign and trade with D'Lo or Austin Reeves or a couple of different, relatively interesting young guys on the roster. But if Beal wants to go to the Lakers and they're willing to work with him on a trade, he can get himself there, not only to a place that he wants to go, not only limit what Washington gets in return because of the no trade clause, but also make sure that that Lakers roster stays well and fully intact. And it's him, it's Davis, and it's LeBron. That's a real possibility. If the no trade clause didn't exist, the Lakers would not be in this video. But because it's there, because he has so much control over where he goes and what that team has left once he gets there, the Lakers are very much involved in this. Now, there are going to be other teams thrown around. Portland is going to be an interesting possibility, of course, with the 3rd overall pick in the draft. New Orleans is going to be thrown out there with some of the weird Zion stuff, as well as their draft compensation. Oklahoma City is going to be brought up again because of the amount of picks that they have. But this situation is different than any star trade situation we've seen in recent years, because Beal has supposedly been available for a while. They've never gone through with a trade. He's wanted to stay there. Now he's gotten his big deal, and the amount of control that he has over this situation is completely different than anything that we have seen in recent years. And so, like I said, the compensation is going to be lower. The destination, I think, is going to be very clear as we get further along in this process where he would like to go. It's common, right, for players to go to a team and say, these are the places that I would like to go. But Bradley Beal gets to say, these are the only places I want to go, and you can't send me anywhere else. And so even if there's a team out there like Brooklyn or Phoenix, it says, hey, you know what, maybe we want to get in on the Bradley Beal thing. If he doesn't want to be there, then it doesn't matter. Now, it is worth mentioning that this is not a guarantee that this is going to happen. The Wizards can always change their mind. They've got a lot of offseason decisions to make between Porzingis and Kuzma, and Beal has been their guy, and maybe they want to continue to reward his loyalty. He's never been someone that has come out and said, I absolutely want to be traded, even if that noise has maybe gotten a little bit louder recently leading up to these reports. This is far from a guaranteed situation, but as I mentioned in the intro, it's the strongest point of evidence that we've gotten in the years of Bradley Beal speculation that him and the team are working on a new team for him, which of course would mean a trade. And what I want to know from you guys is, given all this information, what are the Beal trades that you're looking at? What do you think is fair? What do you think is good compensation in exchange for Washington? Because ultimately, I think this is going to look really, really bad for the Wizards. They had an opportunity for years. They knew their franchise wasn't going anywhere. They had an opportunity for years to make this deal, to set themselves up well for the future. They've handicapped themselves because of the big contract, because of the no trade clause. And now I think they're going to get significantly less, not only certainly, with compared to what people were expecting, but what they could have gotten for him had they made this move like a year ago.